We just finished a Mars-Saturn conjunction in the sign of Aries that was co-present for the last 5 weeks and culminated at an exact conjunction between Mars and Saturn on April 19th. And today I want to talk with a group of different students of my Hellenistic astrology course, as well as patrons of the astrology podcast, to hear some stories about how the Mars-Saturn conjunction went and what kind of events played out in their lives based on the whole sign house that the conjunction was transiting over the course of the past several weeks. So this is going to be probably an episode of the astrology podcast, as well as a recording for my Hellenistic astrology course students, where I do a live webinar every month to go through things and look at charts and try to teach in practice how I've taken some of the ancient techniques of Hellenistic astrology and incorporated them into astrology in a modern context and merged them with some of the techniques that I still think are valid and relevant for modern astrology. So, one of those techniques that I realized and found early on is that the ancient astrologers were paying attention to both sign-based conjunctions and sign-based aspects, as well as degree-based aspects, and they considered to be both important and relevant. So, in modern times, aspect theory had become pretty much exclusively or almost exclusively degree based, where modern, I should say, astrologers in the 20th century primarily just focused on when planets got close to an aspect by degree. And in some instances, we're like only paying attention to the closest aspects, like ones that were exact within 1 degree of orb. So while there is some a valid side to that. There's some validity to that because when an aspect is close within 1 degree, that does tend to be when it's at its most acute and like visible and when the most pivotal events tend to take place. As I talked about in a recent podcast episode that was also a webinar on exact transits, there's still something really important to be said about when two planets move into a sign-based aspect, that it opens up a window in which sometimes a number of different things happen that are still matching or connected with the overall sequence of events tied in with that aspect between those two planets, but it plays out over a broader span of time. And nowhere is that more evident than with conjunctions when two planets are transiting the same sign together. And especially with the Mars and Saturn, because they tend to be so distinctive and because both planets tend to indicate challenging events, sometimes it's really obvious when you pay attention to when they first move into the same sign together and then what happens in the interim before they leave that sign and break the sign-based conjunction, or what I call a copresence, what was called in ancient astrology a copresence. So today, that's what I want to illustrate and want to talk about, and hopefully get some good examples of. Because when a transit like this passes, it provides us with a good opportunity while it's still fresh in our minds to think back at some of the things that happened. Some of which will be like for certain people will be really significant, especially if it was hitting a prominent part of their chart, like one of the angular houses or the degree of an angle. In other instances, it could be more important if the conjunction was somehow activated by annual perfections, like if Aries was the perfected sign, for example, or other factors, like if it hit an exact aspect to the birth chart, can also really make the conjunction pop more and stand out as more important. But despite that, there's some people that will have experienced really significant events, but there's also people that will experience events of, let's say, medium importance that were like not life-changing, but like kind of stood out at the time. And then there's other people that will have experienced from the transit really low-level events of things that were like absolutely not life-changing or something you'd write about in the person's biography, or even that they even hardly remember maybe a month or two later. But nonetheless, they were actually, because they were happening in a certain house in the person's chart, or they're hitting the person's chart in a certain way, they still manifested in a low level event that was consistent with the nature of that Mars-Saturn conjunction. So I'm hoping to see some of those today as well. So I want to give actually a few examples from my own life because I did a little recording for patrons when this happened, but I've been tracking things, especially in doing a transit journal over the course of the past several months, because I want to document the high level and the medium level and the low level things that coincide with transits. And at the end, at some point, I want to do a transits episode in order to summarize some of my findings. So for me, this conjunction, I have Aquarius rising, so Aries is my third whole sign house, and the third house has to do with like communication. It has to do with neighbors, and it can also have to do with what are other third house things like extended relatives and things like that, people that are in your local environment. It can also have to do with short distance travel and a number of other topics. And one of the things that I found interesting is as soon as Mars went into Aries, joining Saturn there, I started seeing all these like third house things come up at different points, but especially as the conjunction drew close and we had a really unique conjunction on April 19th and April 20th, where it was like Mars was conjoining Saturn and then Mercury came up and conjoined at the same time. So it was actually a triple conjunction that occurred in a few day time span. So, one of the things that happened is shortly after Mars moved into that sign, I had a neighbor who had borrowed something of mine but moved away. They came back into town unexpectedly to and returned something that they had borrowed of mine, basically. But then when I got it back, I found out it was like damaged. And it was kind of like a weird blend of like a negative event and a positive event. But in both instances, it had to do with the third house topic of neighbors. So sometimes, even though there's significations in the houses that seem like random or minor or not that useful most of the time, occasionally when a transit activates that house, you'll have like that topic come up in a way that you don't expect. So in that instance, it was kind of like a frustrating day, eventually around the conjunction when something was returned of mine, but it turned out a neighbor had damaged it, which was kind of a bummer. Um, this was also happening in the conjunction or in the context of as soon as Mars went into Aries, um, I had had a leak in my apartment, and there was like damage done where they had to like cut out my ceiling in order to fix it from like a sprinkler head from that was shared by all the different units. And then the HOA was supposed to cover it, but then they were saying they wouldn't cover it. So I started having a conflict with other neighbors who were like running the HOA because they weren't covering something that was an expense that like the collective shared like neighborhood of the condo unit is supposed to cover. And that ended up playing out over the entire course of the conjunction of the sign-based conjunction until eventually like 5 weeks later it gets resolved after a period of like tension and inaction and just general annoyance. It was just resolved in the past few days so that it exactly coincided with the entire transit of Mars through that sign, through the third house. Finally, around the exact day of the conjunction, though, it wasn't all negative stuff. One positive thing that happened around the Mercury Mars Saturn conjunction was I had a patron who noticed in a recent episode that my voice wasn't doing so well after long recordings, and they recommended some really actionable steps that I could use to improve my voice from like a voice coach. And it was things that I could incorporate it into that would improve my ability to communicate. So that was a positive thing that sort of like arose out of a negative thing where I did a recording where at the end my voice was really strained and sounded terrible, but then a positive like step came out of it as a result. So that was another third house communication thing. And then finally, also on the day of the conjunction, because a bunch of these things ended up coinciding within a 48 hour period around the exact Mars Saturn conjunction or came to a head at that time. On that day, my uncle called me out of nowhere, and I hadn't talked to him for like a long time on the phone. And then out of nowhere, just like calls me the day of the Mercury-Mars-Saturn conjunction, which is another like third house type topic and type thing. So none of these are groundbreaking, but I just wanted to give some examples of the types of people, things that people should think about as they're thinking back on this transit, because I think sometimes people think that either it's only going to be like major, like groundbreaking things, and therefore they will overlook some of the medium level or lower level things that actually coincided with the transit, but just weren't changing. Or alternatively, they'll think that it has to be all negative things. And while some people genuinely, with this Mars Saturn conjunction, did experience some pretty negative things, and there were some pretty bad things in the news at times. For some people, depending on how it was activating their chart or what the natal disposition of their chart is to begin with, there may have been some positive things that happened as well, especially for some people, because for some people it would have been a recurrence transit overlapping in a positive way. Like, for example, I have like a Mercury Saturn conjunction in my chart. And so part of that triple conjunction was a recurrence of like Mercury Saturn around the same time as the Mars Saturn conjunction. All right, so those are some of the things. That's my intro. Let's jump into doing some interviews. And the first person I was going to interview is Jacqueline. Hey,
Hello.
thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
So in your example, so you have Scorpio rising, so the Mars-Saturn conjunction was in your sixth house, and you said that you were actually in a sixth house profection year, right?
hmm
Okay, so we would expect that to be more activated then if it's happening in the perfected sign and it's happening in the sixth house. And one of the things that you said that came up is you had like a health issue or a health event, right?
Yes. It wasn't a really big event as far as like illness. Um, but it ended up a little bit bigger just because my husband and I both went in, mostly just thinking like if I have some kind of virus, bronchial virus, then he's probably going to get it. So, and he has like this constant cough. And so when we went to the doctor, we were talking about that. And the
What was
doctor
the
like
setup?
immediately, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What was the setup? So you two got sick when?
We got sick. I know it was the second week of April, but I don't know the exact date. I think it was
Okay.
the 17th that we went to the doctor, but I'm not 100% on that.
So you went in around the 17th and you're sick for like several days because
Yes.
if you're going into the doctor, you're like sick enough that you feel like you need to get it checked out.
Yes. So I had been sick. So we went to see my son the first week. I can probably figure this out. Hang on. So we went to see my son the first weekend, and then yeah, it was the second week. So I would say between the 10th and the 17th was like the illness week.
Okay, yeah. So Mars literally went into Aries on the 9th. So it's like it goes into your sixth house and then like bam, like you're sick and you said it was bronchial. So what is your like sinuses and coughing and like stuffed up and stuff like that?
Yeah, like heavy, heavy cough.
Okay, got it. And then by a week into that, it's like you are like, we have to go to the doctor. And this is right around as Mars and Saturn and Mercury are all coming in within a degree or two of each other because the conjunction goes exact in the 19th. And yeah, and the doctor says it's a bronchial infection.
Actually, he doesn't. Like, we're kind of telling him it's a bronchial infection. I had pneumonia when I was 6 years old, and for a long time, I would get one every year. And then it started to be more like once every 3 or 4 years as I became an adult. But my
Hmm.
husband has been having really bad lung issues. And so, just through the course of like a conversation, the doctor says that we both have COPD, which I kind of checked later and I'm like, you'd have to do some pretty extensive testing. Also, getting a getting a cough like once every 3 to 4 years does not necessarily mean COPD, but kind of the message that I got from it was regardless, like, yes, we would have to do more testing. And he did say that. Like, I can't say that like what stage it is or blah blah blah, but you would need to come back and look into that. And kind of the message I got from that was like, yeah, I just need to stop vaping. Like, it doesn't really matter whether I have it right now. It's not that bad, whatever. Kind of what I'm hearing is it's time, like, whatever kind of smoking I need to stop.
So I looked up COPD, and so that he's saying the doctor said basically that you have like a progressive lung disease of some sort as a result of smoking.
Yes.
Okay, got it. So that's actually much more significant. And you realize then at the time that you've got to stop smoking because it's becoming a much bigger issue.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, that's pretty good. I mean,
And for
that's
my husband, I would be in agreement because he coughs like every day. But in my case, like the bronchial infections were actually less frequent than they had been when I was younger. So I don't know. But either way, I was like, yeah, but they're probably going to get worse, Jackie. That's just what's going to happen eventually if you keep smoking. So yeah, that
mm,
was kind of my takeaway.
yeah, I mean, I think I smoked years ago and then I got sick once really bad and I realized like, okay, it's time to quit. So that I mean, I'm sure that's a pretty not super common, but that's an experience that people have sometimes of getting really sick and realizing that they really need to make health changes, and this really co happened to coincide with that for you.
And also that I really don't want to feel like this for like long stretches of time as I get older. Like no matter what the exact situation or the time frame is, like it's nice that I kind of got this warning and I don't want this to be my life, you know.
Yeah, that you can see the like longer term
Mhm.
restrictions and like how that could like hobble you in terms of your quality of life in the future, and that that's something you don't want.
Yeah, definitely. Especially since we getting ill was the week after we had gone to see my son and to visit my new grandson. So, you know, I have four grandchildren between 4 months and 8 years. I don't want to spend their whole life sick. You know what I mean? But having it kind of show up in that timing, like just went to see the grandkids. Now we're sick. But
Yeah,
then
totally.
the following week, I actually spent over a week working on a resume and I was having like interviews for like seasonal work just to kind of do something over the summer, but also at the same time looking for something more long term and more in my field and doing what I love to do. And I generally hate resumes. Like I just everything about them, they're phony, they're worded strangely. I feel like I just generally don't like them, and this job like meant a lot to me, so I was like, I can't have that attitude. And I just went, you know what, just let that go. That's kind of like a I don't know, like a resentment or a preconception that was just kind of holding back the whole process. And I was like,
Mm.
just see it as something that you got to make it your own within this framework of this is what the facts are. So like be creative, not creative with facts, but with the resume itself. And I actually had a blast making that resume. Like I had so much fun, like making it creative and making like certain aspects of it, like speak to the person that I was applying with and communicate who I was and, kind of what my views were without having to list all of that. And then also through the process, had to check in with like past employers to see like, hey, I'm going to use you for a reference if that's okay. So, that had me checking in with women that were like very significant to me, like a decade ago. And, um,
Nice. Like
even
former coworkers.
like former employers, supervisors, but like mentors in some cases. So, that was like just a significant work thing that was, it was not negative at all, but it was difficult. It did take a lot of hours. So I could see that as like the Saturn part. But it was rewarding.
Nice. I love that. Yeah. And that you kind of were able to get over your initial hesitations and like not liking doing that and sort of push yourself to do something new as a result of the tension initially of being sort of forced to of wanting to get that job.
Yeah.
Beautiful. How did it go quitting smoking? Like, has that was that a whole process? Because it's been what, like a month now since what the doctor's appointment roughly?
Yeah, that is definitely it's on my mind consistently. I'm just kind of going through like, okay, so do I want to do the gum? I actually had a close friend many years ago, 10, 12 years ago. She just smoked nicotine or smoked. She chewed nicotine gum all the time.
Mm.
And so it wasn't like she ever quit. Like at this point, I have been smoking for like 40 years.
Hmm.
Ew, yeah, 40 years. I mean, I've had a year off here and a year off there, but that's when I started. So that's a long time. So I don't want to set myself up to fail. So I know I can't do cold turkey. Like I've done that before. I always end up going back. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out like, are we doing patches? Are we doing gum? And we also had to move on the first. So once we get all settled, yeah, getting a real plan for that is definitely on in the works for this year. And I figure it being like a health year, like that's definitely something I'm doing this year.
Yeah, for sure. Healthier with the perfection, all the way through, the through next January, and then also part of your ongoing Saturn transit through the sixth house over the next couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
and probably checking back in on that again at different points. To see how that's going and yeah, what progress you make in terms of making substantial health improvements. But that's a really good example, and it's cool how that's a great example of how two different things came up at once, or overlapped or at different points during the course of that like 5 week transit of Mars through the sixth house, and how it was kind of like activating yeah, some longer term stuff. But it sounds like you got some good stuff out of it, and it wasn't just all a drag necessarily, even though it began with you being like very sick as soon as Mars ingressed into the sign.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was overall, I was a lot more nervous about it and it ended up really well. Like it ended up really good, like very informational. It was good.
cool. All right. Well, thanks for sharing your example. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Awesome. All right. So that was a good first example. Okay, that was good. All right. So let's move on to the next one because I want to see how many I can squeeze in today. So Dimitris, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. Okay, here we go. So this is your chart. We're looking at a chart with Cancer rising for those listening to the audio version, and the Mars-Saturn conjunction, which is at like 7 and 8 degrees of Aries, was right on your midheaven in the 10th whole sign house, with your midheaven degree being at 8 degrees of Aries. And you said that you were going through some issues in terms of your work and your relationship with your boss during the course of this transit.
Yes, so I've been working in that particular job for around a year now, and I've had a lot of issues from the beginning. We've had a lot of fights as the months went on, but particularly the last month, I would say, I have witnessed a shift from actually having conflicts between us, between the two of us, to
Mhm.
seeing like he might pretend that I don't exist in the office, or
Mm.
um, that how I read the situation is that like he's so tired from constantly having conflicts with me that he just doesn't want to like have anything to do with me.
Okay.
And also I've been thinking the past few months, but actually recently, like it's been really in my mind about the fact that how my job in particularly really sets me back in my studies. I'm trying to finish my bachelor's now, and so these two, like I'm thinking of quitting, thinking of what I can do next, and the past month has been really like it's the highlight of the month in my mind.
Okay.
So it was really interesting to me that it was right at the top of my midheaven.
Yeah, definitely. And just having those feelings of it reaching a new turning point with a boss
Hmm.
in terms of him avoiding you, and so the workplace is getting more and more awkward. But then also it's making you reflect on your own work and life direction, and like and where you want to be headed in your life and what you want to do, and whether this is really what you want to be doing, or if it's forcing you to start thinking about going a different direction.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually the another interesting part is that it's actually my first job in the area of like expertise that I want to work in. So in
Hmm.
art and curating and in art spaces in general. It's my first time ever working in a like in an environment like that. So the fact that it's actually the 10th house and not the sixth that I have been usually working like seeing for jobs and yeah.
Right. Say that again, or I'm trying to understand. I missed part of what you said.
So usually because this is the first my first job that it's like I feel that it's part of my career,
Okay.
not like a job that I just do like serving or being a barista that I usually do used to do just to like get by. I've been trying to really put work on it. So it's actually the first time that the 10th house with my work has been really activated and not another house being like uh, for just money or a job, like the difference between job
Yeah.
and career. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. A difference between like a sixth house thing versus a tenth
Yeah,
house
exactly.
type type thing. And it's interesting that, Saturn's been it first went into your tenth house last June and July. When did you start this job?
So I started around, I would say April,
Okay.
probably.
So you started in April and
Yeah, I
like,
started in April. It was an on and off thing for a couple of months, and then I signed my contract around June, I think.
okay. And then when
Because
did the
I'm
issue
doing some. Sorry.
when did the issues with the boss start happening?
I would say after like in September, October, it was like more vibrant. What the issues were,
Hmm.
but the biggest conflicts have been from the start of this year. It's been really like hard.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, so just thinking about that in terms of the overall context of the Saturn transit through your 10th house and
Mhm.
just getting a job and having it be one of the first career things. So there's a greater sense of significance and responsibility with that in terms of the 2 or 3 year Saturn transit through your 10th house. But then also, yeah, sometimes when we're having challenging transits in the 10th house, there can also be conflict with superiors and things like that. So it's interesting that that reached a turning point for you here. Where are you going to go with it? Are you considering whether to look at other options or where are you going to go at this point?
Yeah, I'm actually thinking of quitting this summer, so the next couple of months.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, a really interesting part for me is that because the conjunction is really close to a square with um, my Jupiter and like a bit further away from my ascendant, it's been
Hmm.
really like I've it's the whole this work thing has been making me think a lot about like who I am as a person, like actual personal stuff.
Hmm.
Um, like I think that I really tie all these thoughts to my like personality and my identity in a
Hmm.
way as a creative person. So yeah, I'm actually really interested to see what is going to happen with these transits now because I'm having the Venus Jupiter in the first. So I'm thinking that maybe there'll be a connection to these thoughts about my job.
Right. How old are you or what profession are you in again?
I just turned 24, but
Nice.
when the conjunction went exact, I was 23. So.
Okay. So you're going through a 12th house year and you finish
Mhm.
that up and now you're in a first house year and then
Yeah.
yeah, so that conjunction's about to happen in your first house. So that is really good and will be a great opportunity for yeah, some reflections about self and identity and who you are and where you want to go that could be really productive in early June when that Venus Jupiter conjunction takes place. But yeah, it's even though it's tough that you were in a kind of difficult workplace situation, and it sounds like it took a turn for the worse, at least in terms of your relationship with your boss during the Mars-Saturn conjunction. In some instances, those difficult transits can push us to go in a different direction, in your case, career-wise, than we might otherwise, and sometimes that can be really fruitful in the end.
Yes, exactly what I've been thinking.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that example. I think that's good. We could dwell on it
Thank you.
longer, but I think that's really, really good and concise.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Anybody have any questions? Jacqueline says, my husband also has 23 Cancer ascendant and almost identical timing issues with a boss at work. Crazy. Yeah, that's one of the things is seeing sometimes similar overlaps with people with different rising signs and how it works out in a sometimes similar domain of the life, even if the specifics are a lot different. So maybe we'll get an example like that today at some point. If anybody has a one that's similar to one that we go through in a similar house and a similar expression, let me know in the chat and maybe we could do that. Okay, so along a similar lines, we're going to switch to the sixth house um, with Kriemhild. So let me promote you to a panelist. Hello.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for
Um,
joining me.
it's a little dark here, I can see. Hi, Chris. Nice to
Hey,
meet you.
yeah, nice to meet you. What's your birth data?
3rd of August, 1960. I was born in Charlottesville, Virginia at 15:10. That's 3 p.m. and 10 minutes.
All right. Is your ascendant 9 degrees of Sagittarius?
That's right.
Here is your chart. So for the audio listeners, you have Sagittarius rising, and the Mars-Saturn conjunction then was in your fifth house, which is one of the houses associated with creativity and works and artistic expression and things like that. And you said that one of the things that happened in the past few weeks is you decided to shut down your online store for your art, right?
Yes, I did that yesterday. I had a hard time the past months um, to be seen. It was hard for me. The work was very hard. Um, I have a lot of drawings and paintings, but it's hard for me to be seen. I can do whatever I want. It just won't work out for me. I can't sell, and I've been going on handcraft markets, and that's when it actually started in November 2025. It was so hard to go on these markets. It was a hardship. Uh, I'm sorry, cannot speak so good. Well, it has never been this way. I always had a lot of fun drawing and painting, and in the last few months, I just uh, it feels like a depression, as if I can't paint anymore,
Hmm.
and it's not working for me. And I'm also in I had a solar eclipse in the 10th house in Virgo, and yeah, it's just it's going down the drain. My business is going down the drain, and my husband told me I should just quit. It's no use more being online with the art.
Hmm.
And
How
yeah,
long, so how long have you been doing art for in general?
well, this is actually what I learned. I went to an art school at the Lake of Constance in Germany,
Hmm.
and had a graphic design. Um, I'm a graphic designer,
Okay.
and um, uh, with focus on illustration. And yes, I have been in a oh gee in a Werbeagentur, in a advertisement agency in Germany for 7 or 8 years. and then I was self-employed. And then in 2003, I stopped being a self-employed graphic designer, and I opened up an online shop and did something completely different. I sold hair extensions and did this for 10 years, and it worked very well for me.
Hmm.
I also went to Hong Kong to fairs, to the beauty fairs in Hong Kong. And after this time, 2015, I had to um, shut down the online shop with the hair business because it wasn't working anymore. I was not able to buy raw human hair, which would not mat. I was getting very bad uh, hair from all the countries.
Okay.
So I had to stop that, and then I switched back to doing art. And since 2018, I had this online shop,
Hmm.
and yeah, and now it's just not working anymore. Yeah.
Okay. So you've been having the online shop since 2018, and then yeah, just
Yes.
re realizing over the past 5 weeks that you feel like you have to shut it down just because it's not bringing in as much income and not selling as much lately.
Yes, it's I have to invest too much, and it's not just I'm just not making money. It's so hard. Can't believe it, but that's the way it is. And also this when Neptune, Saturn came into Aries, my uncle died,
Mm.
and I sent a letter to my aunt to Connecticut from Germany. She lives in Connecticut, and I sent it in November, and but she only got it in February. So she didn't know that I wrote a letter to her until February.
Oh no.
And the ruler of the fifth house is in my seventh house, um, 1 degree um, in
Gemini.
in Gemini. That's right. Yeah.
Mm.
And I can tell you, I am having problems now with Uranus on the Mars and coming from the sixth house. So many problems. It's just sudden problems, and uh, funny things are happening. Like I have a package on the 17th of April. I got a package with the mail with three porcelain cups, which had cost a lot of money. And the post officer, he just threw it over the fence on our stone terrace. And
Okay.
so they broke. And so I called the DHL and complained about it. And they said, okay, they'll send a post officer for the next day to pick it up and to bring it to a place where they take a look at it, and then you will be refunded.
Mm.
So the next day, the post officer was a woman. She came to pick it up, and she said, well, um, she can't take it along because she doesn't have a code. And so I had to call DHL again. They said, well, she didn't do her work right. They
Okay.
will send a new post officer the next day. And
Um,
the next day, the following day, she came again, and she still wouldn't take the package. Uh, I,
okay.
I, I have trouble explaining what happened, but
Yeah, that's okay.
it was very annoying. And the last thing what happened a few days ago, I
Hold on a
got a,
second. Hold on, hold
yeah,
on. I'd
yeah,
like to focus. Let's focus on the fifth house thing, just
yes,
because I've got to move on in just a minute. So
okay,
I want to
yes,
bring the core of your story to completion. So the core though is just you had a really hard ending of having to give something up. Do you think that you'll be able to return to art in the future, possibly if the circumstances are different, or that you'll keep doing it personally in your free time? Or what's your primary reflection coming out of this time in terms of where you're headed in the future?
Uh, I I don't know. I would like to keep on doing art, but I don't but it won't work for me online anymore. That's what I think.
Got it. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things is just, I don't know if this is true completely globally, but I know the economies in different places are starting to go down recently, and I know a lot of different industries are struggling more and finding less sales of different things that they're doing. It's interesting to me that this Mars-Saturn conjunction, it was squaring your Saturn in the second house, and so some of the fundamental tension there is that tension between your creative desires to express yourself creatively in the fifth house, but then that running into a challenge with the second house Saturn. So hopefully this is a period of experiencing that opening Saturn square for you natally and by transit, but hopefully in the future at some point when some of those planets move out of that square that the situation will be different and you'll be able to explore or pursue that again, or find a different way to make it work financially.
Yes. Also, the KI or the artificial intelligence thing is
Right.
also a theme that makes it hard for artists. And
Right.
also the fact that we cannot send our art to America anymore because of
Yeah.
the high,
The tariffs.
yes, the tariffs are high, and also the sending tariffs with DHL
Hmm.
is and the tax we have to, it's like pay so much. The people who would buy something from German artists, they have to pay a lot of tax, so that's
Right.
also a problem. I used to sell a lot uh, to US customers.
Yeah, that's been really crazy for me trying to buy books from Germany recently, like older books. I mean, it is interesting how Uranus, as you already pointed out, is the ruler of your fifth house, and it's also transiting over your Mars at the time, and some of those disruptions that are coming from outside of your control, whether it's AI or taxes or from tariffs from other countries. Again, hopefully at some point when Uranus gets off of your Mars and isn't just hanging there disrupting things, that some of this will recede, and then whatever the new environment is, you'll be able to find a different way to do your art and express yourself in a way that's supportive and feels good. So I guess just keep that in mind that the transits won't always be this way, even if this is a particularly tough time for that in terms of how you were using it to support yourself financially up to this point.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your example. Do you have like a link to any of your artwork where it's still up at this point?
Oh, no, I shut it down. I have on Instagram,
Hmm.
um, but it just only a few things. I wanted to shut that down too.
What's
Yes.
what's your Instagram currently?
It's my name is Listen to Art. It's, yes, listen, the number two and art.
Okay, I'm not signed in, but I think I can see the first couple of ones. So here is, there you go. Yeah, that's beautiful. Is this your page?
Yeah, yeah, yes. That's a few things I do. Some watercolors and yes.
Nice. All
Oh,
right.
that's,
Well,
thank you for showing that.
yeah.
That's nice.
People should check it out. I mean, you don't have to close your Instagram page even if you close the other one, but yeah, I hope you're able to bring it back at some point, and we'll have to check in once some of those transits are over, like the Saturn transit, and just see where you're at then.
Thank you. It's very nice, very kind of you. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye. All right. Let me check the chat. Anybody have any points or questions? Yeah, in the chat, Brandy says definitely keep your Instagram. And Kate says the art is beautiful. Yeah, sometimes so one of the things we learn from that and from some of the other ones is sometimes it seems like we've had this recurring theme of sometimes you have to give something up. And that was a theme in this one. Our previous person was considering giving up his job, even though it was one of the first career things. Um, the first example was the sixth house and considering like giving up smoking due to like health issues. So we're seeing a little bit of a recurring theme here, and sometimes that can be permanent, but other times it can just open up other options that maybe you hadn't considered in that sort of like cliche, Saturn sometimes closes one door and opens another. All right. So, okay. The next most upvoted one is Jessica with the 11th house transit. Do you want to join me to share? Because that's a different house that we haven't talked about yet.
Can you see me?
Hey, yeah, thanks for joining me.
Hi.
Hey, what's your birth data?
November 7th, 1984.
Okay, let me see if I got this right. Are you 15 Gemini rising?
Yep.
All right, your chart looks a little familiar. Can't put my finger on it.
I am very intrigued with Scorpio's charts for that reason.
Yeah, well, especially ones born in your instance, like 6 days after me. Uh, all right, so is your chart 15 Gemini rising?
Yes.
Okay, let me put the bio wheel up actually. There we go. Okay, so with Gemini rising, you said that the conjunction was happening in your 11th house, which is the place of friends and groups and alliances, and that your social network was like blown up during the course of this transit.
Yes. Um, so because I have disabled kids, like the most social network that I have is through work.
Hmm.
And because when I had to quit because they could not be watched, it blew up my entire world, literally.
Because you had to change jobs, and so all of a sudden you lost all of your friends.
And I have to move. I will no longer be in the same town. So, yeah.
Got it. So, what was the timing surrounding changing jobs or losing that job?
The 19th.
Oh, wow. So it happened like right on the conjunction. So
Yeah, it was great.
what happened exactly?
What happened was, so I have a son who is graduating, and well, he graduated yesterday, but he didn't bother to come home to watch his brothers. And so there was just nothing I could do about it. So I wasn't able to go to work. And once that happens, you know, and the interesting thing is I also worked in disabilities.
Hmm.
Um, and so unfortunately, they understood. You know what I mean?
Okay. They understood. What do you mean they understood?
Well, they understood that I have to move because there are no daycares that deal in disabilities in Watertown. There's only two daycares in the entire state, and they're located in Sioux Falls.
Okay, got it. So they
So for the long term, the entire blow up had everything mostly fixed by now. Right now, the only thing I'm looking for is still a job, and I already have one in place. I have a home in Sioux Falls. They're in the right district of these daycares. But obviously, it pretty much blew up my entire friend group.
got it. Okay. So, and were you fired technically then?
Yes.
Okay. So you're basically like fired on the Mars-Saturn conjunction or shortly after that. It's kind of interesting how like Mars and Mercury, right after the conjunction, as well as Saturn for that matter, moved into an exact square with your Jupiter at 10 degrees of Capricorn, and that's the ruler of your 10th whole sign house. So that's kind of where some of the challenging career job stuff is coming from. And then, yeah, so and now we're getting towards the end of the Mars transit, but that was acting as the trigger, as we've seen in some of our previous examples, for a longer term transit, and some longer term changes are happening. And one of your biggest, with Saturn going through your 11th house, and one of your biggest reflections is just that you're bummed that you're gonna lose all of your friends that you've spent a while building up because of having to move.
Yeah. And I'm
Okay.
moving an hour and a half away, so it's not like they're going to be able to come very often. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, that is tricky. Um, okay. Well, that
And not
makes,
only that, but I don't generally leave my house a lot because I have to take care of them. So I
hmm,
don't know a lot of people. So, like, when it blew up those friends that I had, it was kind of a big deal.
right, because it's harder if you're not like going out and socializing all the time to like be able to make new friends in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so will you have a moment of being, well, I guess it's not, I was going to say, will you have a moment of being able to say goodbye to your current friend group? But I guess losing the job itself immediately, that was one of the biggest things, is all of a sudden you're not going into the workplace anymore. So that just almost immediately severed some of those friendships.
Yeah.
Got
And
it.
my understanding is some things have happened at that business that I had nothing to do with since then. But yeah, like pretty much, yeah, it was immediate.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, that's really tough. Well, I guess that's a good example, though, that sometimes, while the primary thing that happened was that you lost your job and got fired that day, that one of the things that was most important to you and the way it's reflected in your chart through the 11th house was the way it impacted your social groups. And that's interesting then, that the thing that was most subjectively important to you, that sort of like internal thing, is the thing that was showing up the most in terms of the transit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I would totally agree with that.
Yeah, well, that's tough. I mean, at least, Mars is getting out of there. And so while Saturn is still going to be transiting the 11th house and still working through some of that, hopefully, eventually, once you do get settled into the new place, you'll be able to start slowly rebuilding some kind of friend group, or making some new friends, even if it's not quite the same as the old ones.
I hope so. One bit at
Okay.
a time. I would assume they'll end up being through work also because that's really the only place I go.
Sure, sure. Yeah, well, just one step at a time, but yeah, that's a good example. So thanks for sharing it.
Thank you.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye. Yeah, Violet in the chat says culturally we don't talk about the impact of friend loss enough. It's quite impactful. Yeah, it really can be. It can be really significant, both, later in life as well. Sometimes later in life just as much as early in life. I mean, sometimes a friend loss or other things like that can be super impactful early in the life, especially if you have like, there's 11th house friends, but there's also like third house friends, which are sometimes like the kids you grow up with in your neighborhood, for example. And yeah, friendship can be really, really, really important. And there's periods of good transits of like making new friends or having friends support you or something positive happening in the life of a friend. But the flip side of that sometimes can be challenging transits and having the loss of a friend, going through like a period of strained relationships with friends, or um, yeah, just having an absence or a period of like a lack of friendship, let's say, versus a period on the opposite end of the spectrum of like many friendships, being abundant with friends. So, that's really good way to, this is really good for helping us to understand sometimes what transits can do and how that can work out in a different, a spectrum of different ways. All right, cool. So, one of them, there was a seventh house one by Morgan. Hey,
Hi.
thanks for joining me. What's your birth data?
7/25/95.
All right. So, for those listening to audio, you have Libra rising, and The Mars-Saturn conjunction has happened in your seventh whole sign house. Actually, not far from your descending, because your descendant's at like 9 degrees of Aries, and the Mars-Saturn conjunction happened at like 7 and 8 degrees of Aries. So, you said in your description that you've been going through major relationship problems, and there was a really big turning point with that recently.
Yeah, it wasn't one big thing that happened. I think over the past 3 weeks, it was more of the realization that our communication issues are just not going to be resolved, and kind of accepting that this is, my marriage is probably going to end in the next few months.
Okay. So you had said in your description that you'd been having problems for a while, but that, um, and you're in a seventh house perfection year, so the seventh house is also activated this year. But then in the past month, it became really clear that there's like a turning point, and that you told him last week that you'd be moving out in December when your lease is up.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, basically just we just communicate so differently and have such different views in life. And we've been together for like 10 years since we were super young.
Hmm.
And I think it's always so up and down, good and bad, that I still thought we could figure it out. And I think I just really accepted this past month that in order to like progress in my life, I can't go anywhere while I'm still in this relationship. So,
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's a really big turning point then, in terms of that. And it's interesting how, like with our other examples, it was about sort of letting go of something, or the idea of letting go of something. But in your case, in the seventh house of relationships and marriage, and how it's part of a longer, like ongoing thing, with Saturn having first moved into your seventh house last year in June, when Saturn initially dipped into Aries. And probably last summer and fall, there would have been some significant stuff that probably would have come up at that time that would be a precursor, giving you a preview of this. But then Saturn retrograded out and went back into your sixth house for several months. And then it came back early this year, and then met up with Mars. And then that Mars transit ends up becoming the trigger for like the longer term 2 to 3 year Saturn transit through your seventh house.
yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that, so it wasn't though that something specific happened, but it was more of a internal realization for you.
Yeah, it's kind of that the same thing's been happening over and over again. And I felt like I was stuck in a time loop,
Hmm.
just nothing was changing. And I was like, I either am going to live like this the rest of my life or actually make a change. Um, yeah, I think it was more of like a reality check
Got it.
situation.
Okay. And that happened, especially, you said like a week ago or something?
Yeah, I think it was when we were arguing about like I heard us both saying the same thing we've said 1,000 times. And I actually think it was on April, I have a journal of it, April 22nd. So just a
Oh,
few
wow.
days after it went exact, that's when I told him, and that's when I kind of made the decision.
Okay. Yeah, so right during the Mercury Mars Saturn conjunction, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, incredible. Yeah, well, that's a really big deal and big change to happen, but then obviously it's not ideal or pleasant. But then if you decide to stick with that, and if it does go that way, at least presumably it's like part of the realization for you was just making a decision to do something hard because you want, your life ideally to be different than that, and hopefully, and that part of it is in the pursuit of finding something better or having a more ideal life, giving something up is part of the underlying like archetype of the transit almost, it seems like.
Yeah, I'm relieved because it's not a question anymore of if it'll work out. It's just kind of I know and I can move forward.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Well, and you're in your seventh house perfection year still until July, and then that'll switch over to the eighth house. Um, and sometimes that can be about shared resources and other things like that. And the yeah, especially disentangling things like that can sometimes be part of the process or can be tricky. But um, yeah, that's a great example. And hopefully that'll be one of those, like, as we've seen before, seen in some of the other examples, but closing one door and then like opening other doors in the future. And that's one of the biggest things that we all see, I think, with really difficult transits sometimes is something hard happens, but then later when we have positive transits, there's other opportunities that allowed for in the future.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. All right. Well, you got some time. You were born in what, 1995, so you've got a little bit of time to find out, in the future, where things go. So yeah, I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Let's find the next one. Oh no. Okay, that could be a good one. We haven't done the third house yet. Um, Feven, if that had the third house transit, are you still here? Hey, thanks for joining me.
Okay. No problem.
What's your birth data?
So 16th of February, 1996.
All right. And so with Capricorn rising, what was the core of your example again?
Oh, so the core of my example was natally, I have a copresence of Mars and Saturn in my third house, but the
Hmm.
transit was happening in my fourth. So my the core of my example was actually kind of drawing on derived houses because it was something that happened to my sibling. Um, in that when we went away on a trip, like a short trip, she accompanied me to help me, and her because she had a problem with her pipe. The water maintenance team came in to fix it, but then they forgot to close the tap. So they left the hot water tap running for
Mm.
a duration of like, I think about 6 days. So when she came back from the trip and went back to her dorm room on the 12th of April, the entire room was just black mold.
Oh God, that's terrible.
Yeah, it was, I didn't even know it was possible. It was kind of a strange happening. We didn't, and basically as a result of that, all of her belongings, so her second house is she basically has nothing. All of her clothing got covered in mold, and it was really creepy because it was just like webs of black mold everywhere. So it felt kind of haunting in a way. It was like a haunting of black mold. It was really weird, but it
Right.
felt very kind of Mars, Neptune coded. And then
Mm.
the Saturn. So basically, um, as the Mars Saturn aspect was perfecting, the kind of being stuck between a rock and a hard place became really evident because the university accommodation weren't taking responsibility. So at first they outright denied a maintenance, like any maintenance member came in at all because they were like, it's Easter, no one was working, which was
Mm.
false because she had an email saying that actually um, they were going to attend. So she got the appointment email while she was away. And then since then, they've just kind of tried to fob her off. And part of the story is as well, because of what happened, she stayed with me at my home and stayed. So even though we were away for like a couple of weeks, she ended up staying with me for like an extra month as she tried to figure it out. So this kind of
Okay.
whole, yeah, Mars Saturn story was like, yeah, her being in my home, and obviously there being a little bit of tension sometimes because of like, yeah, um,
Right.
because it was a bit of a tight squeeze. So, and also a high stress situation. I mean, obviously, like, yeah. So that's like the core of the story. So it was a bit long winded.
No, that was perfect. What profession are you in? How old are you?
So I am 30. I'm in a seventh house year. So it's a moon perfection, like the moon is being activated as my
Got,
Time Lord.
got it. Okay. So you're in a lunar perfection year. And then what were the eclipses? We had a second house eclipse and a ninth house eclipse. What were the dates on the trip? Because it sounds like you come. Actually, I had two questions. What are the dates on the trips? And what is her rising sign?
Okay, so she's actually a Libra rising. She's at 1 degrees of Libra.
Okay.
And the date of the trip was, so we left on the 30th of March. We arrived on the 10th of April, but because her university is out of London, she stayed a night and then she went on the 12th because we arrived so late on the 10th, it was basically the 12th.
Okay. That's really funny that the it's like you're starting this trip and we've got Mercury's coming off of the retrograde in your third house and Mars passes over your Saturn in the third house of siblings early in that trip and at some point as the mistake is being made while the two of you are away and unbeknownst to both of you and then Mars changes signs and the two of you get back and then all of a sudden find out that she's had this huge disaster and then as a result of that she has to stay with you although she's kind of freaking out because she's just lost all of her stuff has been destroyed and you two are now living in a cramped place together and that's kind of the experience of the Mars Saturn co-presence through your fourth house over the past several weeks.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And the fact that it was happening so that actually the conflict wasn't really with me, it was actually with my husband, which
Okay.
is which is kind of funny because I have Venus at the eighth, at 8 degrees.
Right.
And I guess Venus's natural significator is like love or relationship. And it was just kind of funny that I mean, I'm so close with her. It was like okay for me. The only tension was like trying to figure out how I could best help her to navigate the bureaucracy. Because I also have
Mhm.
my own. I was also between a rock and a hard place, but that was much more like career stuff. But for her, it was definitely trying to figure out because there was also the problem of the fact that they were trying to use the fact that so she just paid before we got back from our trip. So they were kind of recently they've been telling her, well, because your contract says that once you've paid and a certain, like I think it's like 10 days have elapsed since that, then you can't get your money back because she hasn't been able to move back because they've not repainted it. They said they did a clean, but it wasn't a proper clean. And all they've offered her is like a couple like free washes in the university washing machine and
Mm.
2 weeks of rent.
Okay.
So yeah, that's like, yeah, it's very like frustrating situation. And she's quite young, so it's yeah, intense. But for her, the transit's happening in the seventh house. I haven't quite figured out what that means in terms of her, like from her position. But maybe it's the
Right.
fact that like Neptune's right on her descendant, so feeling like really unsure or like feeling like the boundaries aren't very clear in this like one-to-one contractual like contract obligation that she's in with her university landlords. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And just having to deal with something like that. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and well, and I was noticing also besides Venus, which is the closest planet the conjunction was hitting, it was also squaring your Jupiter, which actually is the ruler of the third house of siblings at that time. And not just the Mars-Saturn conjunction itself, but then Saturn was just kind of slowly grinding over that degree over the course of the past few weeks. Um, yeah, so that makes sense and is really tricky. And then the final thing is just because you natally have a Mars-Saturn conjunction or co-presence in the third house, as soon as Mars moved into Aries, it began a recurrence transit for you of just having those two planets together in the same sign and something happening. But it was interesting that it then referred back to, in some ways, like the natal third house placement of the Mars-Saturn co-presence. How has that co-presence
Yeah.
worked out for you up to this point in terms of the topic of siblings? I mean, it seems like the two of you have a pretty good relationship. Have there been any other issues that have arisen in terms of that co-presence, or how has that gone?
I've actually found that in terms of like natal position, I
Mm,
positive part of my life. I find that that conjunction genuinely speaks to my experience of early education and kind of education more broadly, and having a
right.
difficult time in that department. And so it's
Mm,
kind of funny that the motif is always like school related when it comes to like the grinding effect. Because even like with her, sorry, it's because someone in the chat, Violet, I believe they highlighted the fact that also it was half term in her books. So all her books got destroyed by this mold, by the way, because it was
oh,
so
wow.
steamy and she had exams. But
Ye-
yeah, so it's kind of also affected her as well, like in a way, in a weird way, if that makes sense. The fact that it's impacted her education as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you've had, I do remember that now that you remind me that it was like a major schooling issues for you with early education has been the main way
Mm.
that that's come up. But it's interesting here now that we just had a recurrence of Mars-Saturn, that there was a sibling issue that came up, but it wasn't you having a difficult relationship with your siblings, but it was just like some negative thing happening in the life of your siblings during a recurrence of that transit is kind of an interesting manifestation of it there.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is.
Like
Um,
sometimes it's not our relationship to people or our psychological whatever dynamics with them. Sometimes it's just like the chart can show something challenging is coming up in the lives of those around us for some reason. And in that instance, that seems to be the main thing that happened here.
yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, that's a pretty good example. Thanks for sharing it. I hope are things easing up now that Mars is about to move into the next sign, or where is it at now?
Yeah, we're at the stage now where we're trying to escalate it to a second stage complaint. They've been like really stalling, and if that doesn't proceed, like progress as needed, we'll probably be taking it to an ombudsman, which is kind of like I don't know if there's an equivalent in the US, but it's like a external national body for housing that you can make a formal complaint to when there's kind of been when you've reached when you reach a standstill with the people that you're in conversation with. But yeah, um,
Got it.
hopefully it
Okay.
gets better. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and let's see, the last thing. Yeah, I mean, there's hopefully that does start to get a little bit better once Mars changes signs, but the last thing was just well, there was one other thing, but I'll skip that. I'll just say, yeah, I hope that hopefully that starts making some progress once it changes. Like sometimes you can sh see a kind of vibe shift once the sign-based conjunction gets broken. So, yeah, let me know how it goes.
Yeah. Fingers crossed for her. Thank you so much, Chris. Take care.
All right, take care.
Bye.
So, let me move on to the next one. Um, okay, so Whitney with the 12th house injury transit. Let me know if you're still here. Hey,
Hello,
what's your birth data?
January 24th, 1983.
Right, here is your chart with transits, and the conjunction was taking place in your 12th house in the copresence, and you said you got an injury, right?
Yeah, so it was kind of like nothing like hit my foot, but it was basically like a structural issue with my foot that I had never noticed before. I have something apparently called splay foot, where like the metatarsals of my foot are a bit spread and like wider and flatter.
Hmm.
And I had never noticed this in my life. And then suddenly on April 17th, I had realized, wow, my foot's really been hurting for like a month. I wonder what's going on with this. And then by the 21st, I like couldn't walk at all at my
Oh, wow.
job where I'm on my feet all the time. And so I went home early that day on the 21st, and on the 22nd, I ended up going to three different doctors, and I had to
Hmm.
get like x-rays, and this is when I get diagnosed. And yeah, all this happened on those 3 days. So
And what were you diagnosed with again?
it's called splay foot. So it's kind of cute as far as like Mars Saturn goes, because the issue is a structural issue. It's to do with my skeleton, the bones in my feet, right? So they're there's a weakened structure in the feet essentially. And I
Hmm.
just started a new job in January, December of last year where I'm on my feet all the time. I work in a bakery and cafe, so I'm like constantly running around um, and twisting and turning. And then as a result of my foot structure being off, the way I'm standing on it is wonky and it's causing like major inflammation essentially. So there's like the structural issue that's
When did
causing
you start?
inflammation.
Sorry, when did you start that job?
I started the job officially, my contract was December 1st of last year.
Of 2025?
Yeah,
Okay, got it. So this is really something where because you started that job just months ago now, like five-ish months, 4 or 5 months ago, that it's the issue of being on your feet constantly exacerbated the inherent issue, and then this really came to a head after a few months here in April.
exactly.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense and is interesting in terms of, yeah, just Saturn going um into your 12th house just in February after a month or two of working there, and then Mars coming in and acting as the trigger in bringing events to a head, especially around the exact conjunction. And then what's the prognosis or what's the plan going forward?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'm getting orthotics for my shoes. It's nothing too serious.
Hmm.
But I just need some more support essentially. What the thing that I thought was really interesting about it, as far as 12th house stuff goes, is that it's like so classic of me to basically it's like I kept thinking of that gas break at the same time thing that you guys have talked about a lot when it comes to this conjunction where it's like I have to work really hard because I have to have this job. Like my visa in Germany is caught up in it.
Hmm.
And that's kind of my thinking about it. Is like I have to work really hard. I have to prove myself. I have to be the best. Like this is kind of my how I act about things like this, when in reality, it's not that serious of a job. And I've been really like pushing myself really too hard. Um, and so I think the prognosis internally is more like, like, get the support you need. Yeah, get your foot support through these orthotics, but also get the support you need. Like take a day off if you need it. That's allowed, sit down when you can, these sorts of things that I wasn't allowing myself to do. I think my mindset, it has a lot to do with what's going on, with this injury.
Got it. Okay. And you felt like that was bringing up like 12th house sort of like self-undoing issues for you, or issues where you're pushing yourself basically and harming yourself in the process by doing too much.
Yeah, exactly. Like this long-standing people pleasing type, needing acceptance from my boss or whoever it might be. This pattern really showing up.
Got it. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And then yeah, like you said, hitting a wall, and that analogy we always use of hitting the gas and the brakes at the same time, and just that can sometimes do structural damage and hitting that wall, but then as a result of that, hopefully then having a better idea as you come out of that, both of obviously the things that you had to put into place physically to, offset that with your foot, but then also maybe a longer term project of taking better care of yourself and recognizing your limits at different points as well over the next few years.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. That's really good. I like that. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share.
All right. See ya. Doing this. We're getting through. This is really good. Um, I'm moving through these faster just so I can do as many as possible today. So sorry for not dwelling on any too long. All right, let me see where we're at next. Um, sure, that would be okay, Cheyenne. I thought that was a funny one. I did want to do that.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, we're gonna do yours without video. What's your birth data?
Uh, the 30th of October, 1994.
So Aries rising. So the conjunction and the Mars transit over the past 5 weeks was happening in your first house, and you said you started doing like hot Pilates.
Yeah, my coworker actually invited me to it,
Hmm.
and I always kind of brushed it off. I was like, I'm not a hot Pilates person. Like that just isn't something I would do. But I figured I would try it out, and I actually really enjoyed it. And I get now why people are like hooked on it and they spend a lot of money doing it because I'm like, oh, this is actually amazing. Like you get to sweat. It's kind of like a sauna. Your body gets like, feels really relaxed after. You feel strong. It's really challenging. There's a lot of like cardio involved, and so I've been going about once a week since with my coworker, and it's been fun. It's been a good little like after work treat.
I love that. That's perfect. When did it start roughly?
So I actually went to my first class on the 22nd of
Oh,
April.
that's so funny. Okay, so right after the Mars-Saturn conjunction.
Yeah, yeah. And I was actually traveling the day of, so it was like of the 19th, so I didn't think anything of it really. I wasn't really expecting much. And I think in general the last month, like I've been using a lot of my vices. I've been drinking a lot of caffeine lately, like having a hard time with my energy levels. So I have been trying to like focus more on my physical health, and I figured like this would be a good thing to try at this point.
Nice. Yeah. So the first house and first house transits can be about the body and physical vitality and your health. And sometimes Mars, it's funny about Mars transits is that sometimes it can literally be fiery things, hot, spicy things, or hot things. And in your instance, you're literally, because the hot Pilates, it's like, could you describe it? Because it's like you're doing a sauna kind of and Pilates at the same time.
Yeah, it's like it's like you can find videos of it online and actually start doing it at home just because it's like really good for your core and like people who yeah it works all these really tiny muscles in your body that you really don't activate in other ways. It's almost like a sort of yoga with cardio. I'm sure somebody else could probably explain it much better than me, but it's just a really challenging experience. Like you'll start trembling doing the most simple exercise, and then they'll have you start pulsing like doing repeating the exercise very small movements but like just repetitively, and it is just so challenging.
Hmm.
Like there's really funny videos online of like super buff dudes doing it and they struggle with it because it's just a challenging exercise, and it's all like your own body weight really, or very very light weights.
Right. And part of the context is you said that you've been feeling low energy or vitality lately, and as a result of that, you've been wanting to experiment with new things.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And trying to give like a positive outlet for that, rather than like taking it out on myself or like blowing up on other people around me, like trying to have a positive outlet for those kinds of things so that it is more productive rather than destructive.
Right. Because I'm thinking about this as in the broader context of like a 2 or 3 year Saturn transit through your first house. And that started last year in the middle of 2025. So I was trying to think of like, yeah, the greater context is dealing with health issues and needing to improve your health or going through a period of lower vitality in general. But then here, taking a specific action to like try to improve that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, like every year, like the Pisces season is always really tough on me. Like I end up spending a lot more time sleeping. Like I feel really like lethargic and I have a hard time focusing at work. So I was really excited for this Aries season. Like, yeah, like it's out of my 12th house. I'm gonna hit the ground running. And yeah, I just was like again trying to find like more sort of smaller tangible ways to kind of squeeze in exercise into my busy work week, and it's been great. It's expensive but it's worth it, and yeah, I get to do it with a coworker, and so like it's a kind of a fun bonding experience, and it's local, so getting to be in like my local community is nice too. So yeah, it's been really cool.
Okay, that's kind of interesting. Um, are you making new friends as a result of that in terms of the community element?
Um, I mean, I think like I've gone enough times now. I'm starting to like know the people who work there.
Hmm.
I'm definitely not like a hardcore regular. That there's some people where I think they just live at that Pilates place and they go to every class. Like I'm not there yet, but it just feels good to be out and about. And yeah, I know with Uranus going in my third house too, I've been kind of like trying to get to know my neighbors more and spend more time outside.
Yeah, I was just thinking of how the eclipses that immediately preceded this were in your sixth house and your 11th house, and how it's like you're going and doing it with a work person, but also a friend at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that's a good point too. And yeah, we even like share an office together, so we spend a lot of time together when we are in office, and it's been like a good like way to get to know each other on a more personal level. So yeah, that's been good too.
Perfect. I love it. And no like health issues or like minor injuries or anything during the course of it. It's just been about pushing your body to like improve and get better.
That's actually funny you bring that up because I think during Aries season I tend to get more like injuries, like I'll nick myself like, while I'm cooking or I'll stub my toe. I just kind of accept that I'm a little bit clumsier
Mhm.
as it's going through my first house and but nothing major, all very minor stuff like, I can handle it. It's just bruises and band-aids and whatnot.
Cool.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Awesome. Well, thanks for giving us a positive first house example.
Yeah, yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me again.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, bye.
All right. That was awesome and allowed us to cover bases with another house. Um, yeah, it's not all negative, and that was part of what even though we've gone through more challenging examples during the course of this, that was part of the purpose of my example at the beginning was like sometimes, positive things can come out of it, especially if it's like a recurrence transit for you, or if it's hitting more positive parts of your chart or other things like that, like with my uncle calling me out of nowhere the day of the conjunction, or somebody giving me advice about improving my voice, preserving my voice during a long recording and things like that. Um, Helen said that Mars is the annual perfection lord too in the last example. Okay, that's really good to know. Who else had a positive example that matches the house topic of the conjunction? Ideally, especially a house topic, house we haven't covered yet, um, which is what we haven't done second house, we sort of did fourth house, we did a fifth house. There was a six, seven, eighth we need to do. Ninth we haven't done. I think those are the main ones. Um, yeah, so Brandy, you have an eighth house one, but I was not sure about connecting with the house topic unless it was something that was like mortality related, but I wasn't sure if that was the case. Was it? But thyroid. Okay. Well, maybe I'll circle back around. Olga, you said you had a positive one, and that's one of the next most upvoted ones. So why don't let's do yours real quick if you want to share it. Hey,
Hi everyone.
what's your birth data?
It's 11th of June, 88.
And what was your example again?
So my example was moving into a new apartment that is kind of my dream home. I've been meaning to move close to the ocean since around 3 years, and I found a village that I really loved, but I couldn't find anywhere, any place to buy for like 2 years. And actually, in my solar return chart for this year, I had the Saturn Neptune conjunction right on the IC of the solar return chart. And I was
Hmm.
really scared of that year. But it actually turned out that I had managed to put my dreams into reality, buying this home. But I also had to make these dreams more real, this being an apartment and not a house. And yeah, that happened for me in April, and I moved to the new place exactly on the 19th of April.
Wow. Okay. So you moved literally on the day
Yes.
into the new place on the day of the Mars-Saturn conjunction, and Aries is your fifth whole sign house, but it's also the sign that contains your IC, so there's overlapping fourth house significations in that sign.
Yes, and also Mars is in my fourth house, and it's in Pisces. So it's kind of linking into the place that I moved in because it's Portugal, right at the ocean, and I'm a surfer. So I'm kind of living my Mars right now.
Nice, very cool. I love that. And oh, right, you're sort of living so you're able to surf more at this place.
Yes.
And that's why you wanted to live by the ocean. Okay, that's actually really funny because that brings in the fifth house topics then as well in terms of the Mars-Saturn conjunction falling in the sign of your IC. So we have a major new beginning for moving into a new place, but then that also means that you're going to be able to pursue one of your hobbies more and one of the things that brings you fun and enjoyment, which is surfing by being closer to the beach now.
Yes, exactly. And also Saturn is my ruler of that year, and Mars is the ruler of my progressed ascendant. So it's kind of linking everything together.
Nice. You're in a
But I was
what
really scared of it, and it turned out to be like one of the best things that happened to me in my life for
when
now.
did when did you like how did you moved on the 19th, but when did the opportunity arise or what was the circumstance that led up to suddenly being able to get your dream place?
So I saw this place on 30 of January, and it was actually the day of Moon-Jupiter conjunction, which I also have in my natal chart. So on
Hmm.
that day, I found it. My offer was accepted, I think, when Venus was transiting Venus was trining my natal Venus, when my offer was accepted, and I bought the place on 1st of April.
On the 1st of April. Okay. Right. So right as Mars is going through your fourth house and then is getting ready to go into Aries, and then you eventually move. Nice. Okay. Very cool. And Saturn's the Lord of the year. You're in what profection year are you in?
Second house.
The second house year. Okay. And then it's all about the Saturn transit through your fifth slash IC sign. Brilliant. Well, that's a really good example and a great, yeah, great example that it's not all difficult or challenging. Um, I'm trying to think of, because it's a conjunction, so sometimes the conjunction represents the start of something new or the beginning of a new cycle. But I guess part of it was also the end of a previous cycle and moving away from your previous living situation. How long had you been there?
In Portugal. I was moving back and forth. It's my third winter I was here, but for 2 years I was not able to stay here for the whole year. I was only to stay for the winter because in the summer all the places are rent out to tourists, so it's impossible to find something unless you buy something or you're very lucky to rent something. So I had to move back and forth between Portugal and Poland for the last 2 years, and this year finally I can stay.
Got it. Okay. That's actually kind of interesting just in terms of that shift from Saturn going through your fourth whole sign house and then shifting into your fifth slash IC house. Um, cool. All right. Well, that's a good example and a good, yeah, example that it's not always major challenging stuff, but can be important, setting a new beginning since it's a conjunction, a new 2 year cycle. And in your instance, being able to do some really fun stuff now that you couldn't do before.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Let me see. So we've been going for about 2 hours. So we're getting towards the end of this. Um, Let me glance one more time. Are there any other, let's say, either houses that we haven't covered yet where somebody has a good example of a house we didn't cover, or does anybody have another really, the eighth house? Yeah, we really haven't had. I mean, Brandy, why don't we, if you're still here, we could do your eighth house one, even though it's not directly related to the eighth, just out of curiosity, just because I'm curious what that is activating in your chart. Hey,
Hey, Chris. Hi.
all right. What's your Birth
April
data.
11th, 1985.
All right. So you have Virgo rising.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So you have Virgo rising. The Mars-Saturn conjunction was in your eighth house, and you actually have a few planets natally in your eighth house, including
Mhm.
Mercury and Venus, which are retrograde, as well as the Sun. And let me know. So what happened?
So the week before the Mars-Saturn conjunction, actually, like that Friday, April 10th, I had been going to the doctor with my daughter because she was having some like health issues. She was feeling really weak and dizzy. So we went for an initial um, doctor's appointment in March, and I had missed the messages for a follow up with the doctor until like Mars went right into Aries on that Friday, April 10th.
Hmm.
And I saw that she needed to get some blood work, like retests done, because her thyroid levels were off. They were low, and thyroid issues run in my family on both sides. So I didn't know if that tied to the eighth house because it's like inherited conditions. But so she had to go back to the doctor. And when we went to get more blood work done and went to the doctor actually was like checking her body, and there were signs that she was self-harming. So we found that out, and she was really depressed. Like we had known nothing about this, so it was kind of like a big revelation that happened the week of it actually happened on April 14th, that we had to get her into really intensive therapy. So we started that program, um, and she's been in weekly group therapy for like 9 hours a week, individual therapy, and we're starting family therapy. She's also, we had to follow up with an endocrinologist, and she's also getting neuropsych testing. It's like just a full battery of things that are happening all at the same time with her, like that were physical and mental health challenges that I feel like come from my side of the family.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So that's some pretty heavy stuff to come up all of a sudden. And um yeah, I didn't in the description you had mentioned the just the genetic issue or the inherited issues, and you didn't mention the self-harm piece, but that brings up a whole like host of issues and stuff, and I'm sure concerns or fears on your part about
Yeah,
yeah, like losing, a loved one and other things like that.
yeah, definitely. And then, just thinking about like, well, I'm in an Aquarius perfection right now. So Saturn is the ruler of my fifth and sixth house.
Mm,
So like definitely like health issues with a child, literally. Um, and then I don't know, I have mental health challenges that, I kind of see it in the sixth house as well as the 12th house.
mhm.
So I didn't know if that was getting activated by the sixth house perfection too. It feels like I've been to the doctor's office with her like ever since this whole birthday year started, like several times. So
Right. Yeah. And then it's like um the Saturn Neptune conjunction in your eighth was also like squaring Neptune, and then so was Mars right after it moved into Aries, and um some of the squares to some of that stuff. And I just know some of the things with like thyroid and other things like that can be kind of nebulous and like hard to pin down. And it sounds like
mhm.
you're having to go through that process of trying to find and figure out some things that are kind of hard to pin down sometimes medically. And that kind of makes a little sense there with that crossover between the eighth and the fifth house and just having Neptune there. But hopefully that's something that can get sorted out and where you can find something that's effective, especially if there are any underlying like medical issues that can be treated.
Yes, and we were definitely thinking about the connection between thyroid and her depression too, because they said that it can affect her mental health, if she does have thyroid issues, so that those two things can be interconnected.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Right. For sure. For sure. Okay, that makes sense. And then so you just did you just switch into that sixth house year in April?
Yes.
Okay, so it's like you're in a fifth house year, literally up until as you start getting the tests for her, and then in the final day of your fifth house perfection year, what did you say it was April 10th that you got
Hmm.
you got the test back?
Yes.
Okay, so that's actually a really incredible perfection example, just in terms of something important happening with the topic of children at the tail end of that fifth house perfection year, and then switching into the sixth house, and then immediately with Saturn ruling the sixth house of illness and the fifth house of children, like finding out that there were some like medical things happening there. So that is actually really stunning as as a perfection example there, in addition to the transit example.
Yeah, I thought it was. I didn't know how to really explain it, and I didn't know how much I should say because I know it's a private matter for my daughter. So,
Right. Yeah. I think this is probably sufficient that we sort of get the picture. Yeah, but hopefully that's again one of those things where it's like something difficult comes up and comes to a head and comes into visibility, but then as a result of that, you're able to start working on it and treating the issue and exploring what the options are in order to improve things so that ultimately, even though that it's something like really, really tough, it's ultimately something that's positive because you're facing and recognizing an issue head on that hadn't been recognized previously, but once it comes out into the open are better able to deal with in ways that are constructive.
yeah, I will say that the most positive thing that's come out of it is that we've been communicating a lot better. She has a Mercury Saturn conjunction in Scorpio, so she's
Mm,
not, uh, she doesn't say much, but I'm trying to pull that out of her a little bit. And it's been nice to just say, "Hey, kid, how are you feeling?" and try to get her to talk a little bit more. So that's the positive that's come out of it.
nice. Okay, good. Yeah. Well, then that would have been a Mercury Saturn, that conjunction would have been a recurrence for her as well. And then that's funny then, because as a fellow like Mercury Saturn and Scorpio, I had a communication thing that came up with me during this transit. And so it sounds like she was going through a communication one as well. And I guess if it's any positive advice, I went through similar things when I was that age, but if you can work on those issues and get older, and sometimes things get better with time and age and experience, and eventually you can like grow up and still and be successful in things that maybe she couldn't do earlier in terms of difficulties with communication might later become strengths like later on in life. So I can at least say that from personal experience having that conjunction. So if that's any positive encouragement, I hope that that helps a little bit at least.
It is. I actually told her that you have that too. I was like,
Okay.
one of my teachers. So
Yeah,
you can be brilliant too. She is. She's very smart. So
good. All right, awesome.
well,
Well,
thank
yeah,
you.
thanks for sharing that example.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. All right. Awesome. Um, okay. I think that's good. So we've gone for 2 hours today, so I think I've kind of reached my limit and need to wind it down. Does anybody have any like questions or reflections in the live chat today about anything we learned? Um, one of the recurring themes that I mentioned that we saw was like a theme of letting things go sometimes came up during some of these Mars-Saturn conjunctions, and I thought that was an interesting recurring theme that was coming up. Another one that I saw was things coming to a head, of like a difficult issue coming to a head, especially around the time of the conjunction of Mars and Saturn. But then when the issue comes to a head, the efforts to then get on top of it and to fix the issue that it's come up or to find a way to rectify a problem that's arisen also become part of it. I saw that a little bit when I did the hantavirus episode this earlier this month, where I went through and looked at some other outbreaks of different viruses. And sometimes one of the patterns I was seeing was like an issue with the virus coming to a head, but then also the alarm bells ringing by the different like health organizations and the fear that surrounded that and the recognition of the issue then often led to greater efforts to control it and to contain the virus, and in many instances, like successful efforts to fix something that otherwise could have been a much bigger problem. So it's interesting that we've seen that in some of our individual chart examples in the same way that that can work out in a more collective way in mundane astrology as well. Lauren says it seems to affect people differently depending on the particular natal Mars-Saturn aspect. Do you think this is the case? I did see a lot of people, there were some news stories. I mentioned this on the last forecast episode of like a bunch of people in the government here in the US that had Mars-Saturn conjunctions, and a bunch of them were coming up in the news with challenging stories this month, so that I did notice that there were some people where if this was a recurrence transit for them, then it was standing out much more notably in their life at this time. And we saw one example of that earlier with the Mars-Saturn conjunction in the third house. And then weirdly, during the recurrence transit, a third house topic came up in the person's life that was challenging, at least in the life of the sibling. So I think that's the case. And then also we were seeing in some instances there were people with um, because the Mars-Saturn conjunction was happening this month, but it wasn't the only conjunction. There was other recurrences as well, where there was like the Mercury-Saturn conjunction, for example, or there was also a Mars-Neptune conjunction. And I did notice during our very first example, I forgot to mention that our first native had a Mars-Neptune conjunction. And so when she got sick, that also would have been a recurrence of the Mars-Neptune conjunction in her chart. So it's interesting that there's all these different overlapping considerations for, what can make a conjunction more personally significant to a person, including recurrence transits, but also perfections. And there were a few in particular where we were seeing when the conjunction was falling in the sign that was the perfected sign for the year, based on the perfections from the ascendant, that was definitely standing out as much more significant compared to some of the other examples. Yeah, I saw that, Jessica, in the news as well, that suddenly, as of today, Ebola is like in the news again, and the World Health Organization announced that it was like a significant outbreak that was relevant to the international community. And that was an interesting recurrence of that 2014 Mars-Saturn conjunction where there was an Ebola outbreak, and it started making international headlines at that time, and seeing recurrence transits of that. So, following mundane recurrence transits that can happen over very long spans of time, but also natal ones happening in people's individual lives is very important. Yeah, because sometimes for mundane astrology, especially, repetition becomes the key to prediction, and that's something more and more that I'm trying to develop as a rule in order for astrologers to know how to use that in a predictive capacity. Okay. Well, I think that's it. I think that's it for this webinar. So thanks everyone for joining me today. Obviously, we could have kept going, and there's many more types of examples. There's probably other more positive examples that we could have gotten into but didn't. But I think for the purpose of this, even though we did focus more on negative examples, it is the two malefics. It is the most difficult two most difficult planets traditionally. So we kind of would expect that. But I think that it wasn't all bad, because in many of the examples, like I said, it was a difficult event coming to a head, but then the people were addressing it and dealing with it oftentimes in constructive ways. And even though one of the recurring themes was sometimes letting things go, I think that's a natural part of life. And sometimes letting things go sort of like frees up your hands in order to grab onto something else in the future. And that's the part of this that we can't see yet, because we're focusing in on this individual slice of everybody's life that just happened over the past couple of months. But on a longer term timeline, many of the stories that we looked at today, the difficult event was opening each person up in order to have some positive events happen in that sector of their life in the future. And that's part of the give and take of life, and the give and take of astrology is experiencing this alternation between challenging events and positive events at different points, depending on the transits. So I hope this has been useful and illustrative for people. Thanks each of you for joining me today, and thanks each of you for sharing your example. If you're watching this later, then I do these webinars once a month with students of the Hellenistic course who all joined me today, which you can find at theastrologyschool.com. And I have a whole archive of past webinars like this that we've done over the past few years. It's available on that course site. And then also, I do some live webinars sometimes with patrons of the Astrology Podcast through my page on patreon.com. And that's also something you can join me for when I do those live webinars that are just available for patrons. So today I wanted to merge both of those. So thanks everybody for doing a little merged one with me this month. I thought it was a good one that would be applicable to both groups. But yeah, I think that's it. So thanks for listening or watching to this recording in this episode, and I'll see you again next time. If you're a fan of the podcast and you want to get access to bonus content, then become a patron through my page on Patreon, where you can get early access to new episodes, attend live recordings and webinars, access the monthly electional astrology podcast, the secret astrology podcast that's only available to patrons, or you can even get your name listed in the credits. Find out more at patreon.com/astrologypodcast. Special thanks to the patrons on our producers tier, including patrons Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Isa Sabah, Jeannie Marie Kaplan, Melissa Delano, Sunny Bozbaz, Kwatsi Alabarahu, Annie Newman, Ginger Sodlier, Berlin West, and Nikki Crawford. If you're looking for good dates to do things this year, then be sure to check out our 2026 Electional Astrology Report, which is a guide to the most fortunate dates in 2026. You can get it at theastrologypodcast.com/2026 report. If you're really looking to take your studies of astrology to the next level, then consider signing up for my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course in ancient astrology where I take people from basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures, plus live webinars and Q&A sessions each month, and at the end of the course, you get a certificate of completion saying that you studied with me. Find out more information at theastrologyschool.com. If you're looking to get an astrological consultation, then check out the new consultations page on the podcast website, where I have a list of astrologers I recommend for birth chart readings and other types of consultations. You can find that at theastrologypodcast.com/consultations. The astrology software we use and recommend here on the podcast is called SolarFire for Windows, and you can get a 15% discount on it by using the promo code AP15 at the website alabe.com. For Mac users, we recommend the program called AstroGold for Mac OS, and you can use the promo code AstroPodcast15 to get a 15% discount at their website, which is astrogold.io. And shout out to our sponsors for this episode, including the Northwest Astrology Conference, which is happening in Seattle and being live streamed online May 21st through the 25th, 2026. Find out more information at norwac.net, as well as the United Astrology Conference, which is happening in Chicago this year, September 3rd through the 9th, 2026. Find out more information about that at uacastrology.com.